As I said earlier, we will start in 1 Kings chapter 16. The focus of this evening will be on chapters primarily 18 and 19, focused on Elijah. And I have it titled Elijah in the Wilderness, A Tale of Two Mountains. So if you are a Dickens fan, there's a little reference for you. Some of the thoughts I had prepared actually were inspired or influenced largely in part by Eric Jones and a lesson he gave sometime last year. But before we get to that, it'd be helpful to get some of the context. There is a little bit of backstory. Again, we won't spend too much time because I'd like to get into the majority of the focus of tonight's text. But starting in verse 29 of 1 Kings 16. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, the son of Omri, began to reign over Judah. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all that were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the sons of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and worshipped Baal, and worshipped him. He erected an altar to Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, of God of Israel, and to anger him than all the kings of Israel who were before him. And we'll just stop there. So this is the primary antagonist, although the role he plays is a little minor, at least when it comes to Elijah's portion that we're going to be reading. And he's not really even, I would consider, the main villain. It's more like a supporting role. There's more so a character who plays the main villain throughout this. And then moving on to chapter 17, won't read any of this content, but for those of us who've studied in the past, or if you're just perusing through and looking at some of the material in chapter 17, at a high level, what are some of the big highlighting points? Again, this is hopefully getting us context for chapters 18 and 19. Major events from chapter 17.
Elijah proclaims that there's going to be a drought, and there's not going to be any rain. It's a judgment from the Lord because of all that wickedness we just read about.
Okay. Yeah, so because of Ahab and all the wickedness and idolatry and paganism that he brings, it's going to have consequences. Now, we don't have a due date or a duration that's set, at least in the beginning. That comes later. He just says, it's not going to rain until I, speaking for God, say it will again. Any other big events occur during this time? So we have the drought, which Elijah has to also endure, along with all of Israel. Other things that happen to Elijah or that he performs while this 3-year period, which we'll see later.
His interaction with the widow of Zarephath and her son.
Okay. So at one point, he starts in Israel and he remains there until the creek which he's occupying dries up, during which he's provided for by the Lord with ravens, who brings him meals, but eventually that creek bed dries up and he goes elsewhere. And as Josh said, he goes to Zarephath, which is a very interesting location. And while there, takes care of her, she takes care of him. She's actually, and the text indicates, she's commanded by God to provide for him. And then, as Josh mentioned, her son dies and he raises him from the dead. And it's at that point where we see a proclamation of faith by the woman there. So that's all the context leading up to this point. So there's a drought. It's still ongoing by the time of chapter 18. And Elijah seemingly is now being called right back to Israel. So he's ended his stay at the widow. Any other points of interest that might be helpful to bring up before moving on? Don't want to skip over.
Jesus points out that there were lots of widows in Israel, but he sent outside the borders of God's people. It's almost like God's people are too wicked. I have this other righteous woman I'm going to take care of outside of their borders.
Okay.
There's just, wow.
Yeah. I'll try to remember to repeat things for those back home. But yeah, looking toward the New Testament and its commentary on this passage, the writer made the observation that the Israelites seemingly are too wicked and Elijah has to go elsewhere in order to provide, and God sends him as an errand. And I guess you were looking a little bit into my notes ahead of time, but there's an interesting dynamic between the way God assigns Elijah this assignment and the people of Israel and this woman of Zarephath. We'll come back to that in a bit. But getting now to chapter 18, we'll get into the text. Read just the first 6 verses. And after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. And when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them in 50s in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, Go through the land and to all the springs of the water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive and not lose some of the animals. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. And Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. So now there's the duration we have here, 3 years. It's been 3 years and some change, and now Elijah is being called back. And this opener kind of really showcases the dire setting of the land and what it's come to. So much so that the king is participating in the sad errand, which, if you notice that, it's not just Obadiah or his servants. The king himself is being involved in this process, which is very telling. That's grunt work. That's what you send to other people to do. The king has no business getting on a horse and looking around for grass, but that's what Israel's come to. And so it's a marker for how far they've fallen. We also see a little indication of this character, Obadiah, who plays a supporting role. Thoughts or reactions to any of this in the first opener? Okay. We'll explore a little bit more about Obadiah and his character in the next section. Starting in verse 7. And as Obadiah was on his way, behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, Is it you, my lord Elijah? And he answered him, It is I. Go tell your lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, Have I sinned that you would give your servant to the hand of Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord is not sent to seek you. And then when they would say, He is not here, he would take an oath of the kingdom of that nation, that they had not found you. And now you say, Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab that he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I am your servant and have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did with Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And now you say, Go, tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will kill me. And Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, Is it you, you troubler of Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now, therefore, send and gather all of Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Okay. The context is ramping up. We're getting close to the big scene. Thoughts on this Obadiah character? He's a little bit more fleshed out now in the text. Yeah.
He seems to have a great respect for Elijah. In my version, he called Elijah my master. So he seems to have a lot of respect for him. And even though Obadiah was more or less a servant for Ahab and his household there in Samaria, his palace there.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, touching on Obadiah, he's a loyal man of God, as was said, but he's also in a very challenging position, seemingly second man to Ahab, and that's a challenging place for a man of God to be right now. Other thoughts or reactions to Obadiah? Yeah.
I think it's interesting that he perceives and believes that Elijah will just vanish away. And that seems to be the habit of Elijah. The Holy Spirit will just move him around.
So Obadiah, whether through previous accounts or own personal witnessing, he's aware that Elijah has God's protection. And seemingly in the form of there's this expectation that when something bad arises, God will take Elijah away and protect him. And Obadiah doesn't believe that same gesture is extended to him. Elijah, you are a prophet. You are touched by God. You have his spirit. I may not be whisked away when Ahab comes looking for you. And it'll be my neck. Anything else about Obadiah? Because he's kind of a complex character. He's got a little bit more than surface level details. Yeah.
There's a level that's kind of jumped back a little bit earlier than what we looked at just now, but there's a level of courage and bravery that is there. It seems to kind of waver a little there when he questions Elijah, but he's right under the king's nose, somebody that the king obviously trusts pretty heavily. And when he went to kill all those prophets, he was like, no, I'm going to cover that.
Okay, yeah. So Mark is highlighting what Obadiah has already achieved under dire straits. And some people have observed the fact that it's kind of helpful that there was this preceding parenthetical confirming Obadiah's actions. This is just him making a claim. Elijah, remember what I did? You weren't in town. You were elsewhere. You were in Zarephath. But I happened to save a whole bunch of people. It would sound a little bit different if we didn't have that parenthetical confirming this fact. And he's not just making a claim, trying to gain something from Elijah. This is true, and he's just trying to convey this to the man of God who's been absent these years. Anything else? Yeah, Josh.
So he seems to follow orders, did what the king asked him to do, but he thinks for himself, and he has enough awareness to be concerned about, not concerned, to be knowledgeable about all of the facts. So this is what will happen if this happens or this way. So he's aware of all of that. And so there's always this sense of knowing who you are, knowing what your circumstances are, and making decisions for yourself. That's what he seems to be trying to do.
Yeah. Josh highlighted the fact that he takes personal responsibility. He's a man of action. He's under someone else, but is still subservient and doesn't break from that role. But yeah, he takes into account his own actions and is his own man, despite a very challenging scenario. Yeah, in many ways, I really look up to Obadiah. This is all we have of him recorded for us. But from what we see, I see a man of good character. He had doubts, maybe struggles, certainly fear. That he expresses that very openly. But at a core, a man who's very cognizant of God, the way he operates, sensitive to others, still obeys the law of the land and his king, but not to the point of breaking the law of his true king. I'll leave it at that. Anything else? Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to the next section here. Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you, Austin.
This is just another example, not looking at Abijah himself, but just of, we don't really see God or the prophets getting upset when people voice doubts the first time. And this is just another example of that. We do see God getting upset when people voice doubts the second and third and fourth times, like with Moses. But it seems that even though he has some doubts here, he puts them forth, and when he hears the answer, he follows what he's told.
Yeah. Also making the point that Obadiah, though he did express doubts initially, he wasn't condemned for it. Elijah offers no commentary in response to this. He just simply tells him, no, I won't go away. God's not going to whisk me away. You will be spared, at least on that front. And then, again, Austin mentioned, after being comforted, he went and did his duties. He did what Elijah requested of him. Very good. Anything else before I need to really scan? It's a big room as opposed to the one in the back. Okay. Starting in verse 20, continuing the same chapter. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of Yahweh, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it into pieces, and lay it on wood, but to put no fire on it. And I will prepare the other bull, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire on it. And when you call upon the name of your God, I will call upon the name of the Lord, of Yahweh. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people answered, It is well spoken. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose for yourselves 1 bull, and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it. And they called upon the name of Baal from the morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar and they had made. And at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. And when they cried aloud and cut themselves, after their custom, with swords and lances, until the blood gushed out from upon them. And as midday passed, they raved until the time of offering of oblation, but there was no voice. No one answered, no one paid attention. Okay. This is the scene, obviously, when you're in the young adult class or a children's class where you had the most fun. You get to see Elijah bad-mouthing all the bad priests of Baal. But there's an element here that I hadn't really considered, at least into this year, where I was wondering about God's chosen method for demonstrating his power. He could have done anything, presumably something very visual for the nation to see, because that's the effect he's wanting. But he chose the method of a sacrifice. And that just struck me as curious as to why he would go that route. I'll just open up, and again, I'm not looking for an answer. This is purely just speculation or, considering the text in new light. Thoughts as to why this method? Why choose a sacrifice to show power? Yeah, Joe.
No doubt, the sacrifice in this particular way would show who is true God. In some ways, it was somewhat similar to when Moses had all the plagues for Egypt. It was against Egypt's gods that the plagues were given to show who was over, really, who was God, who was over the world, and who was in charge.
Yeah. John highlighting what God starts with, his goal, which is that people will know. And Elijah's making it very clear at the end of this, whoever God is able to accomplish this thing, that is God, the God. So, yeah, Kevin?
While we're speculating, if we're considering 2 different sacrifices, every other sacrifice that is offered will fall short. Only God's sacrifice is going to be sufficient.
Okay, so talking about the nature and the quality of the sacrifice, and the one Elijah offers and the motive behind it is going to be very different than the Baal's. Yeah, different goal, different sacrifice. Josh.
Mike, you haven't even thought about this, so as we speculate, and I speculate, this sacrifice thing would be something they would be very used to, very aware of. They would know the ins and outs of sacrifices because they're required to do that. And the prophets themselves would also know how to execute that. So there's no question about this is something Josh made up because only he already knows how to do it. We all know how this is supposed to happen.
Okay. Yeah, just highlighting the fact that all the people will be very intimately familiar with this system. This is not a new concept that he's trying to do, make them jump through hurdles. This is something that they're very familiar with, and he's going to use it to show his glory. Yeah, John.
I think it's interesting that the culmination, they make the sacrifices, they kill the bull, so that's done on their part, but for the sacrifice to be complete, there has to be the burning, and the stipulations are that the God has to provide part of the sacrifice, which is not the usual way the sacrifices work. Usually, the people that are offering the sacrifice are then God is going to provide the sacrifice that honors him, which is a lot like what happens with offering Jesus
Yeah.
later.
So yeah, John, noticing a slight difference or critical difference in the way that this sacrifice operates, in that the God is also providing or being involved in the sacrificial system, which is not something that anyone had seen before. So this is unique in that sense, and again, looking towards the future, it's got a very much a Christ-like, a Jesus element to this story. In order for the sacrifice to truly show and display God's dominion, he has to be involved. That man's hands aren't enough. Yeah.
To follow John's point, and with the gods being involved, this shows who is worthy of all of man's sacrifices because of God's participation in that.
Yeah. Thank you. And then just, I mean, perhaps another element here, as far as the motive behind other sacrifices, again, Josh highlighted that everyone's familiar with sacrifice. Pagan or otherwise, people knew what sacrifices were for. And as John highlighted, it's the idea of entreating to gain favor for something. And that's not unheard of. That's still something that the Israelites did as one of the motives behind sacrifice. I want to entreat a higher being, a higher creation, a creator, so I can gain favor. There's this idea of entrusting people, entrusting your God with something in order to gain favor. I will voluntarily give up my first fruits. I will voluntarily hurt myself or harm myself in some way in order to gain favor and put my trust that you will provide. Now, the methodology is very different. The Israelites gave up their first fruits. The pagans gave up of their own flesh and mutilation. And even their firstborns and others were harmed. The Israelites didn't do that. And then where it's different is the element of sacrifice that God instilled within his people, which was to remind them of their sin. That's something that's absent from paganism. The point of sacrifice is to entreat, to gain something. It's not to be as a reminder of my moral imperfect state. That's entirely absent. And so just a war of what sacrifice looks like. This is to be put on display. And then what true sacrifice should be, and what a true God worthy of sacrifice is. I saw several hands. Mark, I'll start with you.
Another interesting note in this, the two bulls were brought to them, and he told them to pick theirs first. If there were any imperfections, anything that was wrong with one or the other, he's giving them the opportunity, essentially, to get the better sacrifice for their God, for their purpose, and he's taking what's left. His faith in that, showing that the factor that God is more interested in showing in that obedience, in following through on that obedience, than necessarily whether he has the better sacrifice. And there's a whole other slew of things that could come into that, Levitical requirements and everything else. But it's just interesting to me the fact that he let them have first pick, and he took what was left for that.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that element before. It's not the first of many steps where he's going to intentionally put himself in a disadvantaged state. Yeah, John.
I was curious, I had a question, you may know the answer, you may not, perhaps someone else does, but there in verse 27 it talks about Elijah mocking them. And I just wonder if this is kind of an example where there comes a time or a point in time where you mock false teachers, or should, to challenge them in that respect?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to do the teacher thing and just throw it back at you guys.
That's okay.
Thoughts on that element? Because that is a worthwhile detail in here. We kind of laugh at it or chuckle at it when we're studying younger, but there's some serious implications.
You want to add a comment on the sacrifice aspect? So even from the pagan side, basically it was the best, the most intimate way to communicate with God or false gods. So that may be a point of, I mean, yes, we can pray, and others, may have prayed to their gods or whatever, but, prior to Jesus, basically the sacrifice was the best option, the
Yeah, just highlighting the element that sacrifice was the ideal way and the most intimate way to approach a higher being. Yeah.
With John, quick, my knee-jerk is, there are a few instances in Scripture where there's a point where whoever is the righteous man just gets fed up, and it's not like this is his first response to somebody in false teaching, this is a continuing pattern. But on the distinctiveness between the two, the pagan sacrifice and the sacrifice to God, I read a really cool book this year from a man who was a refugee from Iran and a Christian in the U.S., and he talked about how so many religions seek either a God who speaks or a God who listens. And in Christianity, you have a God who does both. And so the gods they're offering to are mute, they're not responding at all, and the people don't have rain. And then you have God who listens, speaks through fire, and then listens to their requests for actually having rain. So we have the whole package.
I like that. And I will not attempt to repeat all of that. Austin.
Oh, on a mocking note, I don't think I have a definitive answer for myself even, but just something I noticed is whenever I speak, I want to have intention with that speaking. And for myself, I haven't fallen into a situation where mocking was the best choice. Here, Elijah, I assume, knows that all these prophets are about to get killed. And that's also a circumstance I've never been in. So perhaps there are times to mock, perhaps there's not. But I think in some of these examples, we see people sent to war, people sent to assassinate, people sent to do a lot of things that I don't think I'm sent to do. So in that context, I can't think of an area where that would be my best choice.
Yeah. Oh, Josh.
This is my last comment. But I think this is interesting. Certainly we don't, if you mock a person, there's going to be a reaction to this, to that mocking. In the King James Version I'm reading, he doesn't mock the person, he mocks the God. So everything is about the God, not about the individual. If we were interacting with someone, we would often, not so much attack them, but what we would say would probably be about them more so than whatever they're drawing attention to. So that's the only comment I have regarding it.
Yeah. Noting the direction of the mocking. Yes.
Yeah.
Fred, or I saw a hand over here.
Yeah, I think we're told to speak the truth in love. And sometimes speaking the truth means pointing out clear errors in thinking or belief. And doing so in love tells me, what's in the best interest of that person. So I would agree that that's rarely going to include mocking. I think there are probably better paths to pursue first in most cases. I suppose there may be situations where that's the best way to get through to that particular person. Maybe this is the situation Elijah's in.
Yeah. And it's probably worth noting that we're not dealing with a one-on-one person. This is an entire nation who's succumbed to paganism, who's incorporated idolatry within their life. They're called to be better. And this is a man who's highlighting trying to find a nice term. The astounding nature of giving into something that is false, fake, when they've seen the true since day one, and they understand what a real God looks like and what he is capable of. Yeah, Logan.
So in a modern context where I could see this coming up, and I think it's an excellent point about mocking not the people who are professing the ideas, but in this case the God behind it, or as far as the ideas behind it. There are a lot of different ideas that have different champions today. And so we see here, these are the foremost champions of this false god, the Baals and the Ashers. And so these are, especially in a public forum, you're standing before a multitude, whether it be an audience in a debate hall or like this, where you've got who knows how many people in attendance. And so the idea is to display, like you were saying, highlight just how ridiculous the comparison is between the truth and the falsehood. And in some cases where there is a public confrontation, later on, it's not, doesn't happen very often at all, but there is at least one example I can think of. Sosthenes, the leader of one of the synagogues, who gets in a public confrontation with Paul and ends up in a downfall, but then is apparently one that ends up becoming a Christian in the wake of that. So if we're in a debate setting or a public forum setting where we're coming up against a champion of a false idea, showing the ridiculousness of the idea may be called for in that moment, depending on, again, kind of gauging our audience. He also gauges the audience beforehand. How long will you vacillate between these two opinions? They're dead silent. They're just kind of, well, we're going to wait and see what happens. They're uncommitted. And at the end of it, they change. But then in the wake of it, how do we treat those individual champions in, say, a one-on-one situation? That can make a lot of difference.
And I see plenty of hands, but I have a lot of text to get through. So I will politely move on, but thank you. And again, I don't think we're looking for a singular answer. We understand as readers that this is a unique circumstance. There's a lot of factors at play. Use wisdom when dealing with your own personal life. And supporting the commentary of those who've already spoken up, there's going to be very rare I see in my personal life using of mocking, particularly when there's just a one-on-one. I'm not Elijah, and I'm not dealing with 800 false priests. These are unique and very challenging circumstances. And we have no commentary on God and how Elijah handled this. We have the commentary on God and the instructions that he gave him, how to carry out the sacrifice, maybe not the responses that Elijah gave. I'll leave it at that. We won't take the time to read 30 through 35, but we just go through the process of Elijah preparing his deal. And as was mentioned or alluded to earlier, he goes out of his way to make it more challenging. He puts extra stipulations on his sacrifice, not so with the Baals, mainly in the form of excess water and making it really damp and just absolutely soaked. Go ahead and jump down to verse 36. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Yahweh, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Yahweh, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stone, and all the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, The Yahweh, he is God. The Yahweh, he is God. And Elijah said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal, let no one escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishron and slaughtered them there. Ultimate success, ultimate victory. It's not even close. It's one-sided, and it's apparent to all what this outcome means. And rightfully so, we have a very tremendous unilateral response by the people. I can't imagine what the prophets of Baal were doing at this time, just standing slack-jawed, perhaps fearful if they have an inkling of what's awaiting them. I'm not really sure what was going through their minds. But from the people and the nation, seemingly, this is a unanimous response. And it's interesting to note that he takes them down to the brook. Presumably this would have been a dry brook at this point. But before the water comes, because God promises the water is going to come with Elijah. That's how this whole chapter started. Before it comes, I have to remove some filth at a source of water. And there's a lot of beautiful symmetry and parallels there, which we won't get into. Jumping down to verse 41. And Elijah said to Ahab, Go and eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing rain. And Ahab went up, ate and drank, and Elijah went to the top of Mount Carmel. And he bowed himself on the earth and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, Go up now and look toward the sea. does this multiple times, total of 7, and then we see that a rain cloud comes up, and then Elijah hightails it out of there, runs approximately 15 to 30 miles ahead of a chariot, and beats Ahab to Jezreel. Chapter 19, ultimate high. I can't imagine Elijah's headspace. The endorphins must have been soaring. Chapter 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not take your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he rose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was a head of cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. And this is the portion where I mentioned earlier, some of my thoughts were influenced by Eric Jones. In his lesson, he dealt with the idea of depression or sorrow and grief and kind of parsed the nuances there and how they outplay in today's world and drew conclusions from that. It is important to recognize that the very concept of depression, it was foreign. That's a relatively novel one, historically speaking. That principle, at least in the clinical way we see it today, would have been entirely absent or foreign to the people. Sorrow was understood, grief was understood, but our modern interpretation and understanding of what depression constitutes that, it didn't exist at the time. That, however, there are some obvious overlapping elements that we can probably draw from this text and some similarities. And I just want to consider briefly what Elijah's expectations might have been coming up to this point. Before Jezebel sends a messenger, where might his headspace have been? The people have already acknowledged Yahweh as Lord, and it was a resounding success. And then the evil was purged, it was dealt with, it was killed. And maybe Ahab will surely renounce his paganism. Maybe he'll even remove Jezebel from the kingdom and remove her influence through court. And maybe Israel will finally fully be restored and returned to Yahweh. I don't know what all Elijah was expecting after this. He just had a tremendous victory. Anything short of those things that would come would be already a steep drop. But to come to a death threat from the face of paganism itself is a long way to fall. Andy.
And I don't want to forget the personal. You might also be thinking, finally it's over, I can sleep in a bed, I can have some normalcy. When you think about what his life's been like on the run, I mean, you've got to be thinking he was thinking that there was a hope of an end to that lifestyle as well.
Yeah. 3 years living out and depending on others, entirely alone probably at times. Yeah, I look forward to a nice warm bed amongst brethren who share the same mindset as me. Yeah.
You know, you'd think, why would he be afraid of dying? The Lord's taken care of him all along the way in his service for the Lord. But yet he's afraid, and he almost sounds like he resigns his service for God right now. And he's on the run. But yet, you know, in some ways, you know, this reminds me of Peter when he got out of the boat. He saw Jesus walking on the water. He was heading for Jesus, but then he looked at the waves and the wind and got scared. And he took his eyes off Jesus. And I think here, this is similar. He took his eyes off the Lord. He didn't lean on God. You know, where, you know, God, you've taken care of me before. I'm sure you will now.
Yeah. Just highlighting the human nature of Elijah. The Israelites crossed the Red Sea. They saw Yahweh defeat their enemies. And then in just a couple hours or a couple days, they're hungry. We're going to die out here. We don't change. We've always been the same. We've always had the same threshold for understanding God and remembering what he's done for us. Looking ahead a little bit, I also really see a lot of deep wisdom in how God responds. What does he do for Elijah when he's in this dark, deep state? Eat, sleep, go for a walk. There's a lot to be said for the approach that God gives. And entire studies you can do on that. I'll leave it there for now. In 8 through 19, we see Elijah trekking out, and we see the famous way that God presents himself, that he goes to Horeb, a.k.a. Sinai. And so for those of us who've read this and are familiar with this, consider the significance of where Elijah is. He's at Sinai. He's on Mount Sinai. He's at Horeb. And the manner in which God chooses to reveal himself. So that's the setting. Thoughts on God and how he approaches his broken servant.
It comes in an unexpected way, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's unexpected. And it's through a series, so it's gradual. Andy?
You pointed out earlier, I think Elijah had an expectation, and then he feels like failure. And it seems like God's communicating in a way that says your expectations are not always how things are going to happen, but I'm still here, I'm still in control, even when it's different than what you think.
Okay. Yeah. Steve?
And it's not just verbal affirmation or support. An angel comes and touches you. So there is physical touch, support coming alongside, which words may not penetrate, but that act from God to see an actual presence made an impact.
Brendan, the observation of how sacrificing was a very intimate process with how people interacted with their gods. This is intimate. This is God going out of his way. He's the creator. He doesn't have to do this. But he peels back all the layers of his power. And similar to how Moses was selected amongst all the Israelites, all of Israel on the day of the covenant, they saw God in power and enthroned. Moses got to see a person. He got to see a voice. He got to interact with someone. Elijah gets this immense privilege and display of respect by God lowering himself and peeling back the layers so he can talk to him in a private, quiet conversation. I'll stop there. Anything else about this? At the very end, I'll just say as a summary, Elijah goes from this point, and his next assignment is go assign 2 different kings, one pagan, one a future Israelite, and go assign your successor. Go anoint the man who's going to take your job. And this is not the last thing that Elijah does, not in the text. He goes on to perform additional miracles and prophecies. But at least at this point, he seemingly is given his retirement. He's told, this is the guy who's going to take your place, and this is what he's going to do. And so you talk about rest, as Andy was saying, that expectation of, I've done all this for God. God's saying, yeah, I see that. You've done plenty. Others can fill your shoes and continue the work. Anything else? That was the last bell, so I wanted to respect the time. But anything else before moving on? Okay. Thanks, guys.